Greetings, my fellow heathens. Once again, I'd like to thank you for getting this channel over 15,000 subs. I am in your debt. Anyway, a friend recently asked, could Sufism be considered a left-hand path practice? Interesting question, but before we answer that, we got to figure out what is Sufism. Sufism is the major expression of mysticism in Islam, which is believed that by practicing brings Muslims closer to Allah by way of direct personal experience of God. But herein lies the question, what is God? I've asked this question before, and it's something that should be contemplated and not ignored, especially by those who call themselves self-deified. No matter how you've been raised or what you still believe, God is not an angry, white-bearded man in some nether realm called heaven, granting your wishes, but only when he feels like it. God is, and I've stated it in other videos, conceptually your highest ideal. So then, how is this concept of God interpreted by someone partaking in a mystical practice? But to answer that, we have to understand what mysticism is. Now, most of us have a vague idea of what mysticism is, but to give it a more clinical description, it's been stated that the mystical experience is a particular variety of religious experiences in which the subject is transformed and reports the loss of individuality, the oneness of all reality, union with the deity, the unity of the subject of the experience with the object of the experience. So, dissecting that, the line, the loss of individuality, the oneness of all reality, union with the deity, if you were just to go by that, mysticism would not be considered left-hand path. But more on that later. Now, getting back to Sufism, the word Sufi is believed to stem from the Arabic word suf, which refers to a kind of wool clothing traditionally worn by mystics and ascetics. It's uncertain where this term came from or why it came to be emblematic of Islamic mysticism. Many theories have been advanced, the most obvious of which is that possibly the early Sufis did wear this type of wool, although no evidence has been found that they did. Sufism is not a sect of Islam, but transcends Islamic sects. It originated sometime around the death of Muhammad in 632 AD, but it didn't develop into specific orders until the 12th century. These orders were formed around spiritual founders who eventually gained sainthood. Over the centuries, Sufism has spread throughout the Islamic world, becoming a main component of many Muslim religious practices from the Middle East to South Asia to Africa and even the Balkans. Even though the practices can vary among the different orders, Sufism basically consists of a murshid, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, the spiritual guide, and the murid, a follower who pledges allegiance to the murshid, who then instructs him on how to experience the divine. It's stated that these guides receive their legitimacy from an unbroken chain of teachers going all the way back to a prominent saint or mystic and eventually back to possibly the prophet himself. Thus, the followers of this brotherhood are part of a spiritual continuity with early Islam. They claim to be the heirs of spiritual and esoteric knowledge that has been passed down this chain to the founders of the specific groups and from them to the rest. A central component of Sufi worship involves constant meditative remembrance of God, done both communally and individually, geared toward cultivating greater connection with the divine. Some of the other basic practices that the Sufis take part in, which of course vary from order to order, include prayers and fasting, the performance of rituals at shrines and graves, along with meditation and abstinence. Some Sufi orders use devotional music and ritual movements akin to dance to further enhance that existential nearness to God. However, hostility and antagonism towards Sufis and Sufism has been constant throughout Muslim history. As one can well guess, Sufis have gotten endless shit from many of those who practice a more, let's say, traditional form of Islam. They've been accused of apostasy and blasphemy because they deviate from the core values of Islam as perceived by the fundamentalists. Sufi leaders, communities, and sites have been frequently targeted with acts of violence perpetrated by extremist groups in different parts of the world. They argue that Sufism has brought about confusion in the minds of its believers, leading them away from the purity of their faith. Some actually believe the origins of Sufism stem from Jewish and Christian mysticism, and that these traditions not only inspired but also dictated the evolution of Sufism, thus causing it to deviate further away from Islamic truth. Now, getting back to the main point of this video, is Sufism left-hand path? I'm going to preface this by saying that there are Sufi sects that do some weird shit. And there is a supposed distinct left-hand path variant of Sufism. Sometime in the past, it's said a Westerner encountered a non-mainstream Sufi group in North Africa. There it was said he witnessed a ritual where the jinn possessed individuals who then tore apart a ram with their bare hands. Supposedly as a child, the leader of this sect suffered from spiritual sickness and possession, in which Azazel came to him and inspired him to form a satanic form of Sufism. Is this true? I don't know. The idea is intriguing, though. Now, in traditional Islamic belief, it's stated that one will ultimately encounter the divine in the hereafter if they're a good Muslim. Just like if you're a good Christian, right? But in Sufism, this proximity to God can be realized in this life. You don't have to wait for a maybe reward after death. You can get it in the here and now. Thus, what determines whether or not Sufism is, on a whole, left-hand path depends on the goal or goals of the individual practicing it, or for that matter, any other form of mysticism. Do you want oneness with the divine, or do you want to become divine? That is the simplest question to be asked on whether anything is the left-hand path or not. For example, the left-hand path from the Eastern perspective isn't always left-hand path from our Western perspective. If the Agori, let's say, wanted to be one with Shiva, he would not be on the path as we understand it. But if he wants to be as Shiva is, then he would be. Get it? He wants to be a god, not snuggle up with one. He doesn't want to feel the warmth of the fire. He wants to generate the flames. Look, it's all about the goal, the destination, even more than whether it's heretical or not. Unorthodox, dark, creepy, or weird means nothing. I've stated it many times, but just because it's heterodox doesn't make it left-hand path. So, even though Sufism can sometimes be considered a heretical form of Islam, it doesn't put it on the path. It's what's in the heart of the individual and their individual practice that's important, that determines what road they're on. So, in conclusion, my friends, what road are you taking? Is its emphasis simply on the dark and menacing, or is it on something greater, something more meaningful? Leave your comments down below and help me to get this channel over 20,000 subscribers by this time next year. That's the next goal, so please like, share, and subscribe. I would really appreciate it. Until next time.